All right, well, I was in college. I went to Woodbury College in Los Angeles, and about a year before I knew I was going to graduate, in that area the draft was always there looking at you, and I had a 2S deferment, so for my being in school, and I just decided that I wanted to enlist because I wanted to be an officer and serve my country that way. So I went to the Navy first, and I took the test to go into the Navy and become an officer. And I thought, well, 3 years on a ship, in and out, and that's all they required. And I failed the test. I passed the math part, but I failed the English, and that was one of my best subjects in high school, college, English, So, to my surprise, I didn't go in the Navy. So I grew up in a place called Westchester, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, between two airports, between the Los Angeles International Airport and Hughes Aircraft Company. And you may remember that name, Howard Hughes. He was famous. So I lived between those two airports. So I grew up with airplanes all around me, and had a friend down the street. We built models together. We built gliders. We did all that kind of stuff. And the recruiter, when I walked in the office in downtown Los Angeles, he saw me walk in, and I don't know what it was. He had this giant smile on his face. He didn't know me. And so he asked me those questions, where'd you grow up? What'd you do? Did you have it, model airplanes, et cetera, et cetera? So I said yes, 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 and explained it to him, and he said, we'll just set you up for it. And I told him I was going to graduate about a year. He said, we'll just give you the test. And he said, we have the officer part of the test, and we have the aviation part. I said, great. So I took the test. He called me back about a week later. He said, well, Ken, you got a 93 on the officer part. He said, you got a 95 on the aviation part. He said, you're going to pilot training. He said, come on back down. We're going to fill out the rest of the paperwork and get you going. So that was roughly a year before I went in. So I finished up at Woodbury College and graduated, got my Bachelor of Science degree in sales management, and got my date to go in, and I went in February of the following year, and just did the whole thing, served 5 years. I went through officer training school, San Antonio, Texas, and it was a 90-day wonder. Popped me out as a brown bar, second lieutenant, and off I went to pilot training. I went to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona for pilot training. Started out in the T-41, which is a Cessna 172 with the interior kind of stripped out, and that was the initial airplane to qualify to be a pilot. So you had to solo, just like a regular training. And the people that did the training were government contractors. They were not in the Air Force. So I flew everything. I completed the syllabus there and did fine. I didn't wash out. We had a lot of washouts because they got airsick, and I was in Arizona and I started training in June. So you can imagine the heat and the thermals and all that stuff. So anyway, then I went on to the T-37, which is, you know what it is, you have those here. It's a great little airplane, and did about 100 hours in that. Did about 40 in the T-41, and then moved up to the T-38, and did about 120 hours in the T-38. Supersonic airplane, you've got them here. I don't know if you have the trainer here, but you have the F-5, which is very much like it. So yeah, and graduated, not in the top of my class. I graduated in the lower quarter. We started out with about 120 in my class. 63 got their wings. So the attrition was really high. And a lot of it was, at the beginning, was air sickness, but a lot of it just was skill. You just didn't know who was going to be able to do it and who wasn't. So then we got to the airplanes, the block of airplanes for me to choose from. And like I said, I was in the lower fourth. I wasn't up at the top. The top guy get to pick from the whole block. And most of those guys chose, well, the first guy in my class chose the C-130 of all things, and everybody was going aghast. They were going, what? Not a fighter? but everybody else pretty much fighters, you know, right on down. Nobody was interested in the tankers or the bombers or even the C-130s other than this guy at the top. So I already saw that the list was going to diminish, you know, the choices. And that's what they did. They started with the top guy, right on down. So when they got to me, there was 2 airplanes left, basically. I was a little above I wasn't at the end. And there was a tanker and the bomber. And so I thought that through. We got a chance to see the list and then go home and think about it. And I thought, well, you know, I'm not big on being a gas station. That just doesn't sound like fun to me. I thought the bomber sounded great, and I had no preconceived idea. I really didn't know. I was kind of ready to do whatever it took, you know, to serve my country. So I chose the bomber, B-52s, and lo and behold, it's amazing how things worked out. Because I'm a native of Los Angeles, and I went through pilot training in Arizona at Williams Air Force Base after I did my officer training school. And so I chose the B-52, and I got the B-52 assigned to March Air Force Base in Riverside, California. So I've had a lot of amazing experiences that way where I didn't plan it, but it worked out great because I was close to home, you know. So went through pilot training, and it was definitely a big challenge, and graduated and went on.
What year is that again that you went in the Air Force?
Yeah, I went in '68. February '68, and I graduated in June of '69. So, you know, I had the officer training school, 3 months, 90 days, then pilot training, and then on from there to nuclear weapons school, survival training, and then B-52 training at Castle Air Force Base, again in California. I mean, I didn't know it was going to happen that way, but it was pretty good. And the first takeoff out of Castle, I was in the jump seat. The instructor was in the right seat, and my aircraft commander in the training deal was flying the airplane. He says after we took off, got the gear up. He says, just make a slight bank to the left, and he says, Ken, look up out the window where you can see the ground. And he says, you see the big black spot there? And, you know, the guy, my aircraft commander says, yeah, what is that? And he says, well, that's where that airplane crashed about 2 weeks ago. Within the base confines, too. So that kind of got my attention. So anyway.
Yeah, you didn't want to do that, right?
No, I had great people all the way. I really did. Great people that were mentors to me. You know, he was great. We went through training together. He was going to another base. I don't even remember where he went, but then after I finished up there, I went to March Air Force Base, and I got hooked up with a great aircraft commander there who wanted me on his crew. He got to know me. We spent a little bit of time at the beginning not assigned to a crew so that they could kind of check you out, you know, see who this guy is. So I got selected by this fellow, and he had an instructor crew, okay, all instructors. And I was just blown away because obviously I was a new guy, and I certainly wasn't an instructor. So it was just incredible because it gave me such a great amount of training, great amount of experience with experienced people, you know. And I didn't do that. I mean, that was just what happened, you know. So we were on a S crew. It was called S Select. That was the highest, you know, that was the instructors, usually instructors, and I was not an instructor. Well, I became an instructor, co-pilot. After a while, I was doing that. And so anyway, it was really amazing. So I was a co-pilot for the first year, first year, I guess, maybe a little more than that, year and a half, yeah. And then I was identified as a candidate for becoming an aircraft commander. Now, I was still a first lieutenant. Okay, so, and I again went to another crew, which was an S crew, Select. And my aircraft commander said, I'm going to get you upgraded. That's my goal. I want to make this happen. And I said, great. And I was already an instructor. So I think it was November of '71. I passed the training for an aircraft commander. So I became an aircraft commander in November of '71. Now I was still a first lieutenant, which in those days was just unheard of, because SAC was really filled with high-ranking guys. The pilots were all majors or colonels or lieutenant colonels. I mean, that's just the way it was, because it came out of that 50s, 60s era where that's what SAC was, just high-ranking people. You know, they were kind of like the top guys. But anyway, so yeah, they identified me, told me I was going to be an aircraft commander as a first lieutenant, and I was blown away, and so were a lot of other people, you know. But it was just shortly thereafter. This was in November of '70, and I did go overseas the first time in '70 with that crew, with my first crew, and flew 42 missions, and that helped a lot in my training too. And so in December, they made me an aircraft commander. So I was still a first lieutenant. It was early December, and became an aircraft commander, and then they immediately gave me orders to go to Vietnam, go overseas again. And I'd already done 42 missions as a co-pilot, okay, flying out of Guam, Okinawa, and Thailand.
So
and
you do out and backs from those locations?
Yes,
or
correct.
sometimes in-flight
Yeah, you would. Yeah, you wouldn't know that. You're right. So Guam, yeah, out and back, Okinawa, which they quit after I did it as a co-pilot. They stopped that in probably September, October of '70, so, or '71. I'm sorry, '71. So that was neat to be able to be there too, because there's so much history there, you know, from World War II, Okinawa.
How long would some of those missions take?
I'll give you that. Yeah, that's a real good question. A lot of people probably wonder. So the mission out of Guam in the B-52, and I've told this many times to many people, door to door, okay? Walk out of the trailer or quarters to the bus, 24 hours later, 23 to 24. That was about the range. You were in the air and back, brief, fly, back, debrief, you know, unload, 23 to 24 hours. So I'd walk out the door at 8 in the morning, get back 7 the next morning. Yeah, and then one day off, and then fly the next one. So usually went six cycles like that, and then you get another day off. You actually get a day off.
Yeah, how often would you rotate to take breaks up in the cockpit and stuff like that? Would you have, you know, your co-pilot take over kind of thing? You guys trade off a little bit to take breaks?
Yeah, there wasn't any set pattern. I didn't take a lot of breaks because, I don't know, I just didn't. But I took some, and I'd go back if I was really tired, you know, maybe the end of that cycle, the 6, you know, I've already done 6 now, and I'm pooped, you know. I would go back to the bunk, and we had a bunk upstairs behind the aircraft commander's seat, and it wasn't much. It wasn't really much of a bunk. It was a pad. And, you know, if he was tired, I'd just take over, but normally never more than an hour back there, you know. And the mission itself, I gave you door to door, but I didn't give you the mission itself. The mission itself was 12 to 13 hours. That was the mission. We had the Cold War as well as the Vietnam War. And what do I mean by that? Well, we had to actually train. We had a training mission after we made our bomb run in Southeast Asia. We had a training mission to practice the nuclear mission. A lot of people don't know that, but that's what we did. It wasn't as much in '72, but in '71, that was definitely part of what we had to be, because that was still pretty ongoing thing. So yeah, so we'd be up there for a long time. So we'd do our regular bomb run, drop our ordnance, 3-ship formation, and then we would break off and each do an independent nuclear mission using a ground radar site. Practice, and a tone, you know, we used a tone to signify the release of the weapons, you know. So yeah, that was ongoing. So we had to stay current, and I had to stay current when I was back home too, because I did pull a lot of alert. Our alert would be a week, full week, Thursday morning, 8 o'clock to Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. Just like a fireman, I used to tell people, you'd go to the alert shack out at the end of the runway. The alert shack had a complete basement underground, you know, all reinforced, and then a part that's sat up on top. That's where you slept downstairs, and they'd blow the horn periodically, just like a fireman. run out, jump into the truck. We had siren. We didn't have red lights, but we had a light on the top. And charge to the airplane, do a cartridge start, which is the 30mm cannon shells in number 2 and number 7, and start the engines and taxi out. Over gross weight, tankers the same time. So we usually had 3, sometimes 4 airplanes on alert. I'm glad we're talking about that because a lot of people forget about that. They kind of turn towards the Vietnam thing, see, but that was certainly happening at the same time. So yeah, and that was part of SAC's mission. I have 2 events that were significant. One was the one that is talked about here, and that was when I got hit with the missile. The second one is never talked about, but it was as scary and nerve-wracking as the first one. And it was basically, we were given the wrong takeoff temperature going out of Thailand, and I had to use the emergency war order procedure to get the airplane in the air. I thought for sure there was rising terrain at the end of the runway this day. Normally we took off towards the beach over the ocean, not this day. It was number 2 in a 3 ship. Temperature given to us was 72 degrees. The actual temperature was 82 degrees. I filed an incident report afterwards and I was vindicated. That's one I want for history, because it was as traumatic as the missile hit. So.
Because you have to do different things based on temperature, right?
Yeah. Well, I had to use the emergency war order procedure on that takeoff, and I didn't know I was going to do that until I saw that the airspeed stopped increasing as we were accelerating off the runway. Okay? So I'm number 2 in a 3 ship. I am going to Guam. That's the other bad part of it. The other 2 guys are coming back to Thailand, so they didn't have the fuel load that I had. So I got up to about 100 knots, and we had an 80-knot go, no-go check with a clock that the radar navigator always ran. Told us, were we accelerating or were we not? We passed. We made the 80 knots within the time limit. Well, like I said, got to 100 knots, quit accelerating. So here we are, roaring down the runway, and I'm looking at the fence out here and this hill, which was at the end of the north end of the runway, more than a hill, a little bigger than a hill. And I had to make a decision because I thought I could tell. We might run off the end of the runway and there was nowhere to go. Across this road, which had little vehicles on it and a fence, about a 10-foot high fence. So I did the emergency war order procedure, okay, which was in the manual, wasn't meant to be used in anything like that, but it was meant to be used for example, for the alert airplanes because they were always overgrossed. So the procedure was pull the yoke back all the way into your lap, okay, all the way. Count to 2, or 3, I think, 2. I counted to 2. 1001, 1002. Release it halfway. And that's a procedure I did. And I did that under this horrendous duress of not thinking we were going to make it. Well, we lifted off, and I truly thought the gear was going to touch this fence because when finally the nose rose, I could see the fence and the cars going down the road. And I thought, I'm going to hit that fence. Well, we cleared it. Well, the next 30 minutes was just a horrendous amount of, everybody was scared. Because see, the radar, he could see the terrain, my radar navigator. So once we did lift off, and just as we crossed over that road and fence, he said to me, immediate right to a 10 degrees to the right. I mean, and he said it in a real, scared voice. And so I made the turn, and then he kept giving me vectors to avoid, there was a lot of rising, not real high stuff, but a lot of rising terrain and just things that we had to avoid going off that base to the north. So that's a story that really has never been told. I'm going to tell that story to the Utapao guys next month. I think they'll find it interesting because they're the maintenance guys. And I have to tell you, I'm glad you brought that up because I told those guys last year, I said, you guys, without you guys, we wouldn't have been able to do it. You guys were so awesome. Everybody from the guy filling the oxygen tank to the guy putting the fuel in to the guys working on the engines to the guys, they were just incredible. And it was an experience to be around those guys. They loved what they did, they were proud, and they're just as proud today of what they did. They worked normally 12-hour days, 6 days a week, so 12 on, 12 off, just like we did. And boy, they were as tired or more so than we were after 6 days of that. And then they'd give them a day off, but even a lot of times they didn't do that because we were doing the war. It was the war. Yeah, we flew all D models. I flew the C, D, E, and F. The F I flew, the E and F, I flew in training at Castle. So.
What made each of those kind of unique or different?
Just little improvements on the C. The C, D, and E were pretty much all the same. The F was definitely a bit different. It was probably the last attempt at getting up to the G and the H. Okay, it was just a progressive improvement, basically. The G and the H are quite different, extremely different. The H particularly, because it has the big fan engines, and the gunner sits up front. He's not in the back. So there was a lot of changes after that, and isn't it incredible that the H model is still serving our country, and there's guys still flying it.
So you were mentored coming up, and you've been able to maybe mentor? Or
yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't have a lot of time to do that because the aircraft commander thing happened that year of '71, and then I went overseas for the whole. Well, we left in January, came back in May, took a 28-day break, which is that's the manual, right? TDY, 28 days, back over. That's it. And literally on the 27th day, I was back over. So I had one co-pilot, the first set of those missions over in '72. Okay, that was a guy that was with me when I got the missile hit. Terry Sanders, and Terry was he was a backseater in the F4. He'd already done a tour in Vietnam. He was PCS to Vietnam. So yeah, he was my co-pilot, and he was a great guy. He had already been shot at, and so he gave me a great sense of comfort because he was in a RF4 squadron, triple nickel, and so he got shot at a lot. He never got shot down, but he was a backseater in the F4. Every person in the crew is important, really is. So I had a very experienced gunner, for example. He was a technical sergeant. I mean, he was great. My electronic warfare officer was a lieutenant colonel. He had flown in the B-52 Hustler. Okay, this guy was experienced. And then I had a major as my radar navigator. He had a lot of experience. My navigator was still wet behind the ears. Okay, brand new when he was put on my crew, about 2 months before we went overseas. So he said to me, Boss, he used to call me Boss. His name was Bill Bennett. He said, Boss, I'm not sure if you want to do this, but he said, if it's okay with you, he says, on our flight over to Guam, we flew out of March all the way to Guam. He said, I'm going to shoot celestial the whole way. And he said, I'm not going to let the radar tell me anything. He said, I'm just going to plot the whole mission out as we go. I'm going to shoot every 30 minutes. And that's what we did. And he was a young buck. He was first lieutenant at that point, kind of almost fresh out of nav school. Not too fresh, but he'd never been ORI before. So I said, okay, Bill, you got it, man. We're not going to talk to the radar. He's just going to be there to see what you're doing, but you can do the whole thing yourself. Do the celestial navigation and plot the positions. And so we got close to Guam, and he said, okay, boss, he said, look about 10 degrees to the left. He said, you probably won't see anything yet. But he said, I think you're going to see Guam here, just a couple more minutes. Sure enough, there it was. And with that, radar navigator came on, and he said, Captain Curry, he says, I want you to know we were 1 mile off after crossing the ocean. So the guy was great. He was a great guy. So, and he really did he had that same bent, I think, that my whole crew did. And that's really what helped when this event happened. You know, you have a crew that's all well qualified and working together. You know, what a difference. You know, I may not have made it without them, you know, really. So I did want to share that because that's a little story that, you know, again, I want to recognize everybody. The ground people were great, but these are examples of my own crew surprising me, you know, and it gave me a lot of confidence, you know, it really did. So anyway, the second part of that year in '72, when I went back, I had a new co-pilot who was a real challenge, but this crew was the same. So we had great crew integrity. We led a lot more missions, you know, than we did at the first tour, and obviously because we had the experience, you know. We got towards the end of '72, and we knew we were going to go home because, you know, that's the way TDY works. It's 180 days, and you don't want to go over that 180, or you're PCS automatically. And then home for a 28-day break. So we did our second stint there, and that was latter part of '72, and you know, there was so much dissension in those days in this country about the war, and it even got through to some of the crews, which really disappointed me. I mean, I just looked the other way, but you know, there was some dissension, some grumbling about, you know, not wanting to be doing this. But that was the era too. That was part of just that era.
If the sign text is correct, there was like 17 B-52s that we lost in Southeast Asia or something like that.
Yeah, later that, later, yeah. The Christmas bombing, yeah. That was, you know, that's when we went out after Hanoi and all that. I wasn't out there. I was home.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome.
I knew some of the guys. I knew some of the guys that became POWs. You know. I don't know. It's just the way it worked out. I mean, I didn't have any say over it, and I remember one guy. I still think about him. He came up to me December 20th. I was at the base, the squadron, and I saw him in the parking lot. It's a guy I knew, and he's a co-pilot and a good one. Came up to me and he says, "Hey, how you been?" We chatted for a little bit, and he said, "Man," he says, "I'm leaving on the 23rd." You know, he says, "Man, I'm really scared." And I never forgot that. And sure enough, he had to bail out. I mean, he survived, but he got captured. Yeah. Those guys that did get captured, it was a pretty short time, and they were coming home in February. So